Welcome to the 2009 Bahamas Weather Conference web channel.
The Saffir-Simpson Hurricane Scale originally came out of a 1969 United Nations Commission study on windstorm damage, and Herb Saffir originally developed that. He was a civil engineer, developed that based on wind speed and wind speed alone. Then in the early 70s, he gave this to the National Hurricane Center. I came to the Hurricane Center in 1972, and I remember it being used experimentally. Bob Simpson was the director of the Hurricane Center at that time, and because there were so many people being killed by the storm surge, that Bob Simpson added storm surge values to that scale. Now those were generic values, and it was never meant to be precise because we know the storm surge depends on the bathymetry of the ocean, the orientation of the coastline, and the structure of the hurricane. So those were just guidelines, but they wanted to bring attention to the storm surge, and back in those days we didn't even have a storm surge model that could be used.
I think we should be striving towards forecasting as best we can the impacts, surge, wind, rain, tornadoes, and conveying the relative threats of those actual values to people so that they can make a decision accordingly.
The trick here is to make sure that people understand the impacts from all the hazards. You can't just focus on the wind, you can't just focus on the storm surge, you can't just focus on tornadoes or rainfall. All of those hazards are important, and you need to talk about all of them.
And how do we communicate that?
That's very difficult, and usually the time that you have, especially for the media folks on air, if you just have a minute or two, that's very, very difficult to do. But as the hurricane approaches the coast, most stations go into 24-hour coverage, and then you have time to make it perfectly clear that you have to consider all the hazards.
Do you think there will be generic agreement on not only how you present it, but what you're presenting?
No, and I don't think it's all bad because I don't think I have an answer for all of these, and I'd like to get out in a public debate forum to try to come up with the best ways. There may be a better way, a different way to convey the information, say for a storm threatening New England, for example, than one on the Gulf Coast. It's certainly a different animal on the east coast of Florida versus Gulf Coast of Florida as to how the impact of the storm will go.
In my opinion, there will never be one scale that will solve everything, because if you think about the storm surge, it is so dependent on exactly where the hurricane makes landfall, the orientation of the coastline, the bathymetry of the ocean, and very importantly, the structure of the hurricane. And we don't do a very good job of forecasting how that structure changes with time. The radius of maximum wind, for example, we don't know how to forecast that right now. So, we've got a long, long way to go. And we need to remember that to get a perfect storm surge forecast, you have to have a perfect forecast of the track, a perfect forecast of intensity, and a perfect forecast of the structure of the hurricane. And we're not going to be able to do that ever.